Buckle up, everybody, because it's election time officially, and there's a lot to talk about these days, and we're going to be talking a lot more frequently. We've got TikTok and Election Canada's new content removal policies. They're really interesting. A lot of people have been talking about them, not from the TikTok angle as much, surprisingly, but they've been largely misrepresented. Some people saying, hey, they're going to take down certain political messages. We'll talk about that because what is the truth? What is the truth? That's one of the biggest issues in our lifetime, I personally believe, and people are oversimplifying it. We're not in the year 2010 anymore, not at a time where people are turning on the TV and are trusting in fact checkers, people going over what people are saying and them being the ones to decide whether or not that's true or if it's entirely a fiction. We're not in that era anymore. And we've seen now, we're going to talk about this today, Poilievre sticking to his Canada First slogans. These slogans that a lot of people are saying, hey, that kind of sounds like a guy south of the border. It kind of sounds like Donald Trump. People are making those comparisons. But simultaneously, and people haven't been talking about this, Carney seems to be making his own personal DOGE. You've heard about the Department of Government Efficiency in the States. Well, in his opening press conference for the whole entire election, and people haven't reported on this, Carney is talking about creating a very similar agency here in Canada, but we haven't seen those same comparisons to Trump and Elon Musk. And I've got another big question for us today, one I think that you're going to want to think about. Is this election an election between Canadian political parties? Is it an election between the Conservatives and the Liberals, and to a lesser extent the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, the Green Party and the People's Party of Canada? Is it an election between those individuals, those parties? Or is this more of just one of many battlegrounds? Battlegrounds for foreign nations, nations like India, Russia, and China. Is Canada's election here just a playground for them to battle it out and put their preferred world leaders into place? Well, with allegations flying left and right when it comes to foreign interference, it's really hard to make sense of it, and it's really hard to tell. We're going to talk about all of this today because this is the Russ Matthews Show. Thank you for joining me. Thanks for listening in every week when we talk about Canadian politics and just things going on in the world. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. If you're not listening on YouTube, or if you'd like to listen to it in another place, you can also find the show on Spotify. You can find it on Apple Music. You can find it on Amazon. Even if you're listening on YouTube, head over there, click the follow button, subscribe on those platforms, leave a review. It helps out the channel and the show dramatically. Lots of interesting stuff to talk about today. We're going to start with this misinformation topic because you're going to hear it all the time. You're going to hear it over the next month. Well, that simply isn't true, or that was a lie. These are subjective ideas in today's day and age. It's been one of the biggest themes lately, but I think it's overly simplistic to be able to fact check or to screen for dismiss or malinformation. These are the words you'll hear people talking about all the time. Because information, you almost never get it from the root source these days. And even when you think you are getting it from some sort of root source, it's really hard to verify the validity of it. Every little bit of information is refracted and bent through different lenses, different preconceived ideas that people have in their minds about, well, what is true, what isn't, and how can I interpret this new information as a result of that. Now, I want to show you this article that was on CBC because it's the headline here. We'll start with that. The headline here is Elections Canada has been in touch with social media platforms about election misinformation. And then it makes I'll explain why this is unconnected, but an unconnected claim here about the report from Foreign Interference Inquiry said disinformation is the single biggest risk to our democracy. Now, this might raise some eyebrows here. Elections Canada getting in touch with social media platforms. You might start thinking about what happened in the States with the censorship of certain information, certain stories that may have helped different elections go in different ways. You likely know what I'm referring to, all of this news-based propaganda going on in the States. Now, that raised a lot of eyebrows here in Canada, especially seeing this headline here now. saying that, okay, well, CBC is reporting on Elections Canada going to social media platforms talking about, well, what are your policies for misinformation, this biggest threat that we face here in Canada. Now, the article was widely shared, much in the context of, oh, well, let's see what they're going to pull this time. What are they going to take down? What are they going to not let get out there? But in this specific article, I think it was a little bit overstated. The article was misrepresented in my eyes. I went through Elections Canada and the whole article here. And what they're talking about is specifically talking about claims regarding electoral processes, things like telling people the vote is on one day rather than another, and specifically targeting certain political groups, saying, hey, you're actually not in this riding, so you have to go vote in this other place, trying to sort of shift voting practices. Now, that is the type of information that they're saying we are going to ask these social media platforms to take down. Things that say, oh, we'll try to misinform voters so that they aren't going to actually vote and not actually have their voices represented in this election. And in my eyes, I don't think that that's a bad thing, right? Stopping this kind of misinformation when it comes to very clearly verifiable things that you can check on Elections Canada. And they've come out with all of these tools that I'm rather impressed with, because on Election Canada's website, they're talking about, hey, this is all we're talking about. We're talking about, where do you go to vote? What are our obligations as Elections Canada? They're not making claims about the validity of statements that different political candidates are making. They're just saying, hey, as long as you don't tell people to go to the wrong location to vote, as long as you don't tell them that they should be voting in some way that would spoil their ballot, these types of things, that seems to be what they're concerned about. Now, it gets a little bit more interesting when you parse through this article and you find out that, well, actually, TikTok has come out with an entirely new policy for how they're going to handle mis and disinformation during the Canadian 2025 election. And this is directly from the article. If you're listening in, it's on screen now, but I'll read it for you. They say that, and this is directly from TikTok, that one of their policies is going to be countering misinformation. They say, in our latest transparency report, more than 99% of all the content we removed for election and civic misinformation was identified and taken down before it was reported to us. So they're catching things that they want to take down before it's being reported. We invest in media literacy as a counter misinformation strategy, as well as technology and people to fight misinformation at scale. This includes specialized misinformation moderators with enhanced tools and training, and teams on the ground who partner with experts to prioritize local context and nuance. We're partnering with PolitiFact, a global fact-checking platform or program for English and French, to help assess the accuracy of claims on TikTok so moderators can apply their policies accurately. Now, if this is just in the context of what I was talking about in terms of Elections Canada, then I think that's not that big of a deal. I think taking down stuff that clearly is saying inaccurate information designed to get people to either not vote or to go to the wrong place, maybe make the voting process more frustrating. Sure, I can understand pulling that down. But I'm not entirely convinced that this platform's policy is going to apply only to that specific, very small band of information. Is it going to be just to that civil and civic misinformation? Or will we start getting into the range where we start to see posts taken down because, well, they include information maybe that a political leader has said that is untrue? That's where things get really, really messy. That is where things get really, really messy, because whenever you're making these subjective decisions about what is true and what isn't, well, it's always from the perspective of one individual. So this partnering with PolitiFact, or figuring out how to use these advanced tools so that moderators can take content down, That's where I start getting a little bit worried. How much are individual platforms being able to alter the way that we think about the issues that are being talked about in this election? Now, this is just the TikTok policy, but we've talked previously on the show about one of my biggest concerns. My biggest concern, specifically, that I think will impact people very heavily if they're not aware of it, and that is the uprising, or rather the growth in use of bot farms and social media AI bots that will make it look like a given idea is far more popular than it actually is. You might have noticed a lot of people having the same exact opinions, the same exact ways of stating things. This could be on Reddit. I see it a lot in different Canada Reddit forums. All the same kind of messaging over and over again with these bot profiles, and they're incredibly challenging to determine whether or not they are a bot or not, because you can go into their history and there will be different posts on disparate platforms, but there's no way to know for sure that this wasn't an AI creation that went and posted on these different platforms over the past 6 months to show some account history, so that there would be plausible deniability that they are bots. And it's not just on one political side or another political side. I think this is being used in a dramatic fashion across the board. So that might make you think, well, okay, well, then how do I know what reality is? And I ask myself the exact same thing. Well, you're scrolling on your Twitter feed, you're scrolling on Reddit, you're scrolling on TikTok, all of these platforms. How do I know what's true? How do I know what's not? Well, maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm on a video platform here, but at a baseline, I think that you should be taking accounts with no video content, no discernible way to tell that they are a unique, discrete person. You got to be taking that with a lot more grains of salt, many more grains, maybe a full salt shaker. You got to be taking it with. You go, especially, this is why these text platforms are specifically susceptible to this type of thing. Reddit or Twitter, X. When you don't have a face and a name and a real person that you can watch a video of, or get an idea of who that person is in some other way other than these anonymous text accounts, well, then I think you got to be a little bit more skeptical that they are actually a person, because this concept is called astroturfing, and it's been done around the world for years and years and years. And this idea of making something look like it's grassroots, but really it's just artificial. It's just turf. That's astroturfing, right? That has entered a different stratosphere now that we can have AI manipulated agents going out there and saying, okay, here's 100 people. They're all going to comment on these types of posts. They're going to say this type of message without making it sound like the exact same language, because you can alter things with AI to make it sound like different typos and different turns of phrases, but all towards the same kind of idea to make it look like an idea is a lot more common. So I would just warn to have a little bit more skepticism when you're looking at these text-based platforms. And when it comes to video-based platforms, you're listening, or audio, right? You're listening to me right now, or you're watching me. You can't even take everything that I'm saying without adding your own scrutiny. I think that you've got to go to multiple different creators, multiple different platforms, mixed with your own reading, both of news sources and original source material, and taking as many of those different data points in together. Take all of that in, and then figure out, okay, based on all of this, what do I think? Try to get access to people who don't say things that you like. Access to people that say things that maybe you disagree with would be good to listen to. Take all of that in, and then make up your mind on how you feel and how you think about things based off of that, and based off of really your gut reaction, your gut feeling about a lot of these things, because I think that we're going to have to depend on that a lot more going forward. You're going to have to trust your instincts, because really there's not many great ways to determine what is factual reality and what isn't. Maybe that's kind of a black pill, woe is me, the world is falling apart in this techno advancement. Maybe I'm being too alarmist about that stuff, but this is the way that I'm feeling, and I got to tell you about it. But that leads me into a similar topic here. when we talk about dis and misinformation and what is true, what is not, what is a conspiracy theory, what is not, what is accurate that a politician is saying, and what is not accurate, what's a half-truth, because we see those a lot. I want to play here a clip by a reporter on a bunch of different platforms called Rachel Gilmore. You might have heard of her. Now, do I agree with much of what she says in general? No, I personally don't align with a lot of the things or the sort of explanations of what's going on that she says, but I do think that people have been incredibly cruel to her online because she doesn't think in the same way that maybe a lot of people online do. I think that she's synthesizing information through her lens in good faith. This is the type of stuff that I think you should be consuming, and this is why I'm consuming this type of stuff, because I'm not entirely convinced that the way that I think about the world is certainly the absolute right way to think about the world. And if you don't try to listen to other stuff, you're gonna fall down a path where you're just trying to look for content that sounds in the way that you already think. And I don't think that that's gonna really help you get a better idea of the way the world works. Listen to stuff, disagree with it, but know why you're disagreeing with it. And in this video that she put out just a couple of days ago covering the election and the start of it, she calls out some concerns that I personally have. I personally have these concerns, but she associates them with other views that I don't share, other things that maybe more and more people would say is a conspiracy theory. She connects, I think, very rational views to extreme theories. And I think it's an example of why people who get this feeling that, hey, there's something going on in this country that isn't quite right. People aren't getting these good outcomes. People aren't living happy lives and feeling good about their opportunities in Canada. A lot of people are getting very frustrated when they're talked to in this way that any of these, what I believe are legitimate concerns, are minimized. Listen to this, and then we'll get more into it.
$1 billion. So that's like the big policy stuff from the very beginning of the campaign. But you know me, I love my conspiracy theory dog whistles and disinfo, so I'm going to quickly highlight a little bit of that's already happening too. A fun new bit of disinfo that Poilievre is playing with is this whole century initiative thing. This is a plan that apparently one of Mark Carney's advisors is a fan of, and it's to have the Canadian population reach 100 million people by 2100. So Poilievre keeps implying that Carney is supportive of this plan, even though Carney has explicitly said that if he's elected, the caps on immigration levels, which have been criticized as being fairly restrictive, will remain in place. But I don't know if Poilievre wants to play the game of your advisor's beliefs or your beliefs, because this is one of Pierre's top advisors. But to be fair, Poilievre has said that he is not a MAGA guy. He is Canada first, which sounds a lot like the slogan that's the Canadian equivalent of MAGA, but you know, I digress. But another reason
Okay, we'll pause it there because there's more that I want to get to. So I think she's right. I think she's right in a lot of ways. Because she calls out how Carney started to talk about the Century Initiative. Right. This is a real government lobbying organization that's been put together by and supported by current central bankers, former central bankers, people who have been at the top of different economic organizations, Goldman Sachs, things like this. This is a lobbying organization that has said, hey, we have an important demographic challenge here in Canada, and we need to grow our population to 100 million people by the year 2100. That's the goal of this. They say we got to do that via immigration and via different ways of growing our population internally. This is a very real organization, one that Mark Wiseman, who is one of Poilievre's advisors, was one of the heads of, one of the creators of. Also, he was the head of a pension plan, the Canada Pension Plan, for a while. And we've talked about, okay, well, it's in the interest of pension plans to keep on growing the population so that we can sort of support this thing that may or may not be able to exist long into the future. And some people, I think, are rightfully questioning that. But she's right. Because Poilievre in his press conference comes out and says, well, Carney wants the population, and Carney and Liberals wants the population to go to 100 million by the year 2100. And then she says, well, that's not actually true, because in these press conferences, Carney has said that he's going to keep these immigration caps in place. Now, these immigration caps currently are only over the next 3 years into 2025, at which point they're supposed to be back down to immigration or temporary residents are supposed to be down to 5% of Canada's population. But then those caps kind of end. And sure, it would be true to say that, well, Carney doesn't overtly out in the open want to get the population this high. But you've got to question, what are each of these people's long-term goals? What are their long-term goals? Nobody knows these long-term intentions and plans of either of these guys. On either of them. We hear the Poilievre saying, well, we've got to have immigration match our housing and our healthcare abilities. Sure. And we've got Carney saying the same thing, and these are both in the short term. These are short-term ideas, but I find it hard to believe that we won't go back to similar immigration policy in the future when people's attitudes on immigration have softened, because immigration does address a very dire situation that we're in Canada. We have a birth replacement rate of about 1.26, if not lower right now, meaning for every 2 people, we end up in the next generation with only 1.26 people on average, right? It just doesn't mean that there's just one quarter-sized person, but maybe there are quite a bit of quarter-sized people out there. Maybe there are a few. That's not what that means. That's a really big problem, though. It's a problem when we can see that without immigration or without some drastic policy change, our population is going to shrink. And that's very, very problematic for the current world order. Now, I want to play a little bit more of this clip because, yes, she's right in talking about how, we know what these guys' short-term immigration policies are, but we can't really know for certain what a long-term plan is for when it comes to this declining birth rate, this population collapse that seems like it's inevitable as we look around the world in most advanced economies. Most advanced countries are seeing this dramatic decline in birth rate, and it's a big issue, especially for the way the world is currently structured. Now, should the world remain in this current global world order, or should it be shifted into something else? I think that's a legitimate conversation that we are going to have.
I really don't like this bit of disinfo is it smacks of the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which is super popular among people like Elon Musk. Like, I wouldn't assume it's a mistake that his first thing he says right after saying he opposes this initiative that isn't the Liberals' initiative is that he will cap immigration. So he seems to be implying that that is the opposition to this initiative, and therefore that 100 million people would be in large part fueled by immigration. Replacement theory is a racist conspiracy theory that implies that white people are going to be slowly replaced by people of color in countries like Canada or the United States. And in its most extreme iteration, people believe that the Jews are behind it. I am not saying that Poilievre believes in this, so do not take this out of context like that. But what I am saying is people who believe that theory might have their fears stoked by this kind of rhetoric, and I don't think that Poilievre is blind to that. But that's not the only dog whistle he's engaged in already 2 days.
All right, so there's more to this clip, believe it or not, and we're going to get to that. She talks about the Great Replacement theory and ties the concerns about immigration and concerns about what that can do in Canada, ties that to automatically being some sort of racist policy. If you start talking about immigration as an issue, that means that you automatically support the idea of this Great Replacement theory. Now, let me tell you my views on the Great Replacement theory. In my personal opinion, I don't think that there's some globalist, race-based plan to make our country and countries around the world less white for the sake of making it less white. I don't think that's happening. I don't think that's true. I don't think people are doing this in some sort of racist, white people are better and that's who we should have in our country kind of way. That's not, I don't think that that's what's happening here. I think that, sure, our population is becoming less and less white. I don't think that that is because of the whiteness. I don't think it is because of the not whiteness. I think that it is a reality that is more economic and to the benefit of corporations than any sort of race-based idea here. But I do think that it's beneficial for these corporations and large organizations that depend on population growth to tie these kinds of more extreme ideas about immigration to more tempered ones that maybe would get a little bit more airtime if there weren't these ways that you can link it to something that is extremely awful and in some ways is actually truly racist. I think when you link immigration to this great replacement theory, it's a way to dismiss serious concerns about immigration as a purely race-based thing rather than the logical arguments that can be made about, well, what does this policy do for the average quality of life for citizens? And what does it do for the long-term outcomes of a zero-sum immigration game? Because like I said, we face a really challenging immigration and population issue right now, where we have this collapse of a population with the current birth rate. And I understand why immigration is unpopular right now because of the vast uptick that we've had over the past few years. But I don't think that any politician is being truly honest about this demographic issue that we're talking about. And also, who stands to benefit from certain ways of solving that? And who stands to be harmed? There's not talks about the flaws with the current system, this current system that is addicted to growth. We have these global institutions and these very important institutions in Canada, things like pension plans and things like needing more and more people to tax to cover the debts that we have in Canada because we haven't run a balanced budget in a very, very long time. There's not talk about that. And there's not talking about corporations that have become these sort of vessels for private equity debt games. These games that require perpetual share growth that can then back those loans and can allow corporate lawyers and can allow CEOs to get healthy sort of margins on these kinds of big debt structuring deals that corporations will do. Debt that is only able to be taken on from growing demand that grows share values. You see where I'm going here. That's what I want to know about. That's what I want to hear these leaders talking about. What are their stances on this global system? Like, do we keep on playing this game that we constantly need growth to support and kicking the can down the road, probably able to kick it down 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Sure. Maybe we could stave off some sort of disaster resulting from these kinds of actions over the short and medium term. If we choose to do that, if we choose to make that decision, we're going to need to grow the population to support growth and demand somehow. Like, are we going to continue mass immigration to be able to support this and to sort of take young people from developing nations just to support our own kind of Ponzi economic games? Is that what we're going to do? I mean, that's what we've done. Certainly over the past few years, we've suppressed wages and we've helped out big corporations as a result of it while adding demand and helping the economy to survive while we were raising interest rates. Or maybe on the flip side, we expand what I personally think is a very good policy that was implemented by the Liberals at the very beginning of this past term, or the very beginning of the Trudeau era, where they brought in the Canada Child Benefit, these tax incentives and payments that go out to Canadians based on the amount of children that they have, incentivizing already Canadian citizens, people who are here, to have families, help them out financially, because I think that that's one of the biggest things bringing down the birth rate in Canada, putting us at this 1.26 people per couple rate that we're at. It's economic, I think, largely economic. It's pretty challenging to feel like you have security in terms of shelter, let alone food and educating a child that you're going to have. I think financial help for people would certainly help with that number. But at the same time, doesn't that Canada Child Benefit idea also kind of feel a little dirty as well? Because, yeah, some people may not be having children because of economic reasons, but there are certainly people who just don't want to have children in the first place, and that's okay. But incentivizing having more children in Canada with financial payments, does that look like government giving subsidies to people so that they will have children, not so that they can have fulfilled lives with children, but so that those children can then work in Canada and so that those children can then make endless profits for corporations in Canada? Is it we're doing this because we want you to be able to have the life that you want to have and have the family of the size that you want to have? You should be able to make those decisions yourself as a Canadian citizen, regardless of, like, you shouldn't have to be a CEO to be able to support a family of 5, right? Is that what it's for? Or is it about, we've got this system that needs to be fed? We need to put people through school. We need to put people through secondary education, which has a shortage of students right now. I think a lot of colleges, a lot of universities are going to go under. That's beside the point, though. Is it about feeding the system, or is it about giving people the kind of life that they want to have? That's how I think some people will question the Canada Child Benefit. But if we're choosing to go down the road of perpetual growth, well, then I think that policy is a good one. Definitely rather have people that are here and raised in Canada and have Canadian values from the beginning of their lives and have been able to culturally marinate in Canada, whatever that means, for their childhood, and then have them work and grow the economy and then have families of their own. Sure, I think that's probably best if we are committed to this endless population growth. But I do have a feeling that this solution and right messaging on immigration is that immigration is zero sum, right? There are other nations, there's India and other the Southeast Asian countries and other places around the world where they are still very agricultural based. And as a result, you have more people having more kids because the families need those people to support the family, right? You have less social safety nets in certain places. So you have more people having kids as insurance policies for themselves or as retirement plans for themselves. People will take turns taking care of their elderly parents, different cultural things like that. But there are places in the world where they have a 3 birth rate, right? Instead of having 1.2 people per couple, we have 3 people per couple, 4, 5, these population boom zones. But if those areas move past agriculture, if those areas advance, as I think that most of us hope that they will, become more wealthy and more educated economy, more advanced economy, that's kind of been the goal of this global idea of we want to raise all ships. Well, then isn't our idea of, well, let's bring in all of the best, or just all of the people from another place here to support our population Ponzi? Well, in the short term, I think that could work. But what happens then when inevitably down the road, birth rates change and now more and more global economies are facing this issue? Are we just kind of getting ahead of it and sort of screwing over other nations as we sort of take their youngest and best and brightest? I don't think that immigration at the levels that we have to support an endless growth is an idea that will work over the long term. So what does a world look like where our economy isn't as debt-based and reliant on perpetual growth? Like, how do we reorient the system so that we don't need as many workers to support these institutions? Maybe how can we restructure pension plans so that regardless of the population growth of a country, people will be able to rely on that? How do we also give people more ownership in the world that they live in? This is one of the biggest issues I think I have, is that you have people working for companies and they never see any results of their work outside of pay, right? I don't think that they get the value that they put into their work in a lot of cases because they don't have any equity in the company. And largely, Canadians don't have much equity in Canada. They don't have much ownership or stake in Canada. How do we give people real ownership so that their wealth can grow, especially when global organizations do all this funny business that inflates away the value of their dollars? How do we give people assets that they can hold over the long term relative to the work that they've done in their lives? How do we make it so that it's not just Wall Street types, or Bay Street, I guess, in Canada types, that are able to play these financial equity asset games? How do we make it so that, well, if that activity is going to go on, we should at least have some sort of stopgap or some sort of way to make sure that average Canadians are exposed to that if we're going to allow it to keep happening? How do we make sure that people have ownership over the economy? without falling into this idea that, well, the only way to do that is to trust government entirely to, in some centralized way, organize the economy so that, well, then we'll dole out all the funds equally to people. Quickly, you go down a road where you have to have total trust in the government to not be corrupt and to manage the system like that. Something that I personally don't have faith in the government to do. So these are the big issues in my mind. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know. Comment wherever you're listening to this. What am I getting right? What am I getting wrong? I'm interested to hear your takes on all of this stuff. But it seems like we're addressing not the actual issue whenever we're talking about a policy or an idea, be it immigration or something else. And it's the same for the whole tax cut thing. On the first day of the election campaign, or over the first couple of days, we had both of the leaders of the major two parties come out and say, we are going to cut taxes for Canadians. Now, for people earning over, I believe, $35,000 a year, then each individual person will, under Carney's tax cut, save $400 a year. Under Poilievre's tax cut, a slightly more $900 per year. I don't think that they'll make a slight difference. I don't think that makes a big difference for most people in Canada. I have this feeling that there's an appetite in Canada for more radical changes, because tinkering around the edges with a lot of this stuff, I don't think is going to solve anything. I don't think Poilievre's slightly higher tax cut is going to help people a lot more than Carney's slightly lower tax cut is going to help people. It's just this candy that's put out there for an election to say, well, both of them are going to cut taxes, so who should I vote for? I'll look at these numbers, make my decision based off of that. We're not talking about the right things. These aren't the transformative policies that I think a lot of people have an appetite for today. What does it look like if we sort of tie even greater tax incentives to people who have families, go along that CCB route? Sure, maybe that. Maybe you say, okay, we're going to try to incentivize people to not have to lean on the public sector to get work, but incentivize them, saying, okay, maybe if you start a business in the first 3 calendar years of your first business for every SIN number or something like this, then you will pay no corporate income tax and no personal income tax if you do this behavior that we believe will grow the economy. Right. Obviously, there's nuances, things you got to say under a certain amount, like you can't make $10 billion in the first year and not pay any taxes on it. But do you get these ideas, things that would say, make young Canadians say, well, there's one route that I can go that maybe is the traditional route, the one that's lower risk. But even though Canadians as a people are very risk averse, people want to sort of go the safe route. I think a lot of the time, I think it would be beneficial for the government to say, hey, we're going to provide some real incentives here, some real ways that you can have a little bit of a safety net, or at least a little bit of a outsized positive result if you take these certain actions that will benefit Canada. The tax cuts, I think, are arbitrary. You can say, oh, thank you, Poilievre, yours is 2.5% savings and Carney's is 1%. Wow, Poilievre, you are some sort of god when it comes to tax policy. To me, both of them seem like just tinkering around the edges, kind of marginal. Let's get back to this clip, because we got to go a little bit further, because we've talked a lot about this on the show. We've talked a lot about globalism as this boogeyman bad word that people will hear, and people on the left will say, well, as soon as you start talking about globalism, you must be talking about some sort of conspiracy theory. And people on the right are like, well, a lot of people are like fully bought into the all the way conspiracy theory. But there are moderate people who have questions about globalism and the costs and the benefits, and that's not being talked about in a serious way.
Days into this campaign. A lot of people who believe in the Great Reset conspiracy theory have an issue with globalists. And if you followed me for a while, you already know that I've reported on Poilievre's continuous dog whistles of the Great Reset conspiracy theory through his fundraising emails that talk about eating bugs and more. I know, it's as stupid as it sounds. But listen to this line from his first speech on the day the election was called.
What's more, our nation is more divided than ever before because the liberal, radical, post-national, borderless, and globalist ideology has weakened our nation.
Yeah, that's totally how normal people talk. So
have I been listening to this on 1.5x speed the whole time? Well, hopefully you still got some of that information. Let's finish.
Oh yeah, welcome to the first full day of the election campaign.
Oh, well,
I can already tell.
That was it already. So you hear this idea that reference to globalism, and to be clear here, I'm not trying to come down hard on Rachel Gilmore here. I think, again, well-meaning, trying to sort of filter through the information that she's getting in her own personal way. And like I said, you should be listening to a bunch of different people and doing this filtering yourself to be able to have enough information to then think, okay, what is my view of the way the world is? I think you got to really lean on your personal feelings about this stuff rather than taking anything at face value, especially what I'm saying, especially what any person that you're listening to is saying. I think that that's the world that we're in. I've said that time and time again. But there's this dismissive idea around globalism and trying to connect that to, well, you have to be talking about a conspiracy theory then if you're concerned about globalist ideas. That word, people automatically think InfoWars, Alex Jones, and then he's said, what about Sandy Hook? And this all has to be some sort of awful thing because something that maybe somebody controversial said as a relation to it. I think that is part of the strategy to dismiss some of these things that I think would be negative outcomes for very wealthy people who have a lot of control when it comes to the global community. People always will point out this Great Reset theory because it sounds outlandish and it sounds absurd, especially out of context. Now, do I personally think that the World Economic Forum has absolute control over every worldwide government and that their plans are going to be implemented in lockstep, guaranteed to a T? I don't think that that's what's happening here. But I think pointing to that most extreme view of this conspiracy theory that all of this is happening diminishes, just like we talked about before when it comes to immigration, connecting it to racist things or connecting this to conspiracy theory sounding things will delegitimize the very legitimate ideas that I think are behind them. We look at global organizations like the World Economic Forum, but also like the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of International Settlements, or global health organizations, these types of things, these international standards and global governing bodies. Now, they always have rational reasons for their existence. They always have rational reasons that what they're doing and the policies that they're pushing and the reasons they're trying to influence governments is incredibly altruistic. We're trying to make the world a better place and shape it in our vision. We're trying to make the world better for people. But then you look at those policies and you look at the outcomes of those policies, or I personally have, and I start to question that and I start to say, well, okay, if you really were serving the interests of average people worldwide, well, then how come we're getting the results that we're getting? It seems that the outcomes tend to always benefit the people who are already on the top. I talk about it time and time again. We talk about central bank policy pushed by the Bank of International Settlements, this global community of central bankers who I believe are serving more the interests of corporations and the already wealthy in the current global order than they really do care about the individual people on the ground floor. I don't think that's a reality. But we talk about it throughout the great financial crisis, sure, but most recently in our mind, the pandemic, the massive money printing programs that sure did save the economy. Oh my gosh, I'm just getting so popular. You can probably hear my messages in the background tinging off. It's probably my grandma saying that she's the only one in the world that loves me or something like that. Where was I? I wonder what my grandma would be thinking hearing me talk about global organizations in the modern era. I wonder. Maybe that's what she's messaging me about. Oh my God, where even is that? Okay, well, we're just gonna have to deal with that for the rest of the episode if it keeps on coming through. Oh my gosh. But we talk about the central banks. That's where I was. Now I got my train of thought back. We talk about these global organizations, central banks, and the money printing that went on. And yeah, it did save the economy. It propped up the economy when we were forced to shut it down. But at what cost? but at what cost, and would it have been better than other alternatives? Because while also saving the economy, that you also saved share prices, you saved stock valuations, you made debt incredibly cheap so that people could take on vast amounts of debt to buy real estate, creating asset bubbles, so that now we have this incredibly huge social issue of people not being able to afford housing. Were all of these issues worth the saving of the economy that you did, the lack of scarring that you got from it? This is one example of the types of things where I believe that these global organizations, while sounding good and while maybe even being created in the first place for altruistic and positive reasons, these are just organizations and groups of people like anybody else or like anything else. And they can be co-opted and they can be used to control, right? They can be co-opted and used to push globally for the outcomes that certain small groups of people want to see happen. And that's where my skepticism comes from. And I think conservatives need to do a better job of articulating the globalist concerns so that anyone who talks about this isn't automatically labeled some sort of conspiracy theorist. I think like the other thing we talk about when we talk about globalism is the concerns about the impacts of converting the world to a global economy. We look throughout the 90s and the increased relationships with China and the offshoring of manufacturing. For one, it made our supply chains incredibly vulnerable. It made it so that when something like COVID happens, well, then all of a sudden inflation spikes even more than it would have already with the money printing because, well, now we're having these additional costs because economies are shut down. Oh my gosh, I need to figure out, okay, we're taking 5 seconds here to figure out where this notification sound is even coming from. We got to get to the bottom of this because we don't want to be listening to that for the rest of eternity. Closing my tabs. There we go. All right, we're good now. But we've made us supply chains incredibly vulnerable for times like COVID, but also in relation to what's been going on in the U.S. We see these tariff policies coming into place. And I think that that's an immune system response to this idea that, well, the benefits of globalism outweigh the costs. I'm not so certain. I'm not certain one way or the other on this, but I can understand this idea that maybe it wasn't so good to outsource our manufacturing to other countries around the world. For one, we're just taking advantage of people when it comes to having cheaper labor costs. So maybe it's not even moral in the first place. We got some benefits from it. We got cheaper goods. We have an incredibly... while the cost of living has gone up, we have incredibly low cost of living relative to what that cost of living would be if we were to domestically manufacture everything. That would be incredibly expensive, paying Canadians, paying Americans domestically to manufacture things. So we get things for a lot cheaper. But some say that trade-off has hollowed out the middle class. It's made it so that people don't have as much of a purpose. They don't have these jobs that they can go to where they can make something and see at the end of the day that, hey, that table in my friend's house is something that I made at my factory. Or it's made it so that there's less of a purpose for a lot of people. And I think tariffs and domestic manufacturing will drive up prices. This is the thing, the gotcha that people will say with the Canadian or with the American economic policy right now is, well, this is just going to make things more expensive for America. And yeah, it definitely is. But maybe that added cost, maybe the added cost of living that comes from reshoring will be outweighed by the positive gain of having those manufacturing jobs and having those that kind of economy in North America again. Life will get more expensive, but maybe people will be more selective about their purchases, or maybe it'll be worth it in terms of purpose for people and for national security also, to not be so reliant on this giant complex web of manufacturing worldwide, where, okay, well, if relations sour quickly with China, maybe we're going to lose access to tons and tons and tons of goods, and maybe over the short term paying higher costs to employ Canadians and to make it so that we can rely on ourselves domestically. Maybe that higher cost is worth it, both in terms of national security and wages for people working in the country, as well as just having jobs here locally. I don't know, but I can understand this idea. And this is a criticism of globalism. It's a criticism of global supply chains. It's a criticism of these international trade organizations that will say it is of the most imperative value that we spread out the supply chain all over the place. We can arbitrage for the lowest labor costs. We can make everything as cheaply as possible, lowest input costs, so that we can have higher share prices, a better economy, but a better economy for who, right? We've got growth in stocks, growth in assets, growth in companies. Are the people working for those companies really seeing the outcomes of this positive economic growth? Or are they working and not getting ahead while an increasingly large amount of wealth is concentrated amongst an increasingly small amount of people? That's the world that I'm seeing. So this criticism of globalism seems incredibly reasonable to me, even though many people might say, well, that is some sort of conspiracy theorist idea. Then call me a conspiracy theorist then, because that's my read on what's going on here. You also you might remember from that clip of the talk of saying, well, this Canada First idea is very Trumpian. It's sort of stolen from the Trump playbook. Fair enough. Yet both are kind of populists, kind of saying, oh, well, maybe we should take care of our books and our take care of our books. That's not the saying. Maybe we should get our own house in order. There it is. Get our own house in order before we concern ourselves with things globally. So those are very similar, but there hasn't been a lot of talk about what I think is very significant, which is Mark Carney's launching or proposed launching, if he wins, of a Department of Government Efficiency. We don't see these comparisons of Carney to Elon, but we do see them between Poilievre and Trump, and I think that there's a little bit of hypocrisy there. I want to play you this clip because in it, Carney is asked, well, if you're doing a tax cut too, well, how are you getting the funds for that? The Liberals have just spent the past 5 years saying that any tax cuts would mean cuts to funds and cuts to services and cuts to social welfare programs that we need drastically as a safety net for people. A valid concern if you think that somebody's going to cut those things and you need them, sure. And his answer is, well, we're going to take a page out of Elon's handbook and we're going to create a Department of Government Efficiency, although he calls it the Department of Government Transformation. Very, very different. Not DOGE, but DOGE. With all the Canadiana that Carney's been pushing out there, I think that he should have called it the Public Unit for Cost Killing, or PUC, because that just sounds more Canadian, right? PUC. We're gonna shoot the puck. We're gonna use the puck to save you Canadians money. It sounds like it would be right. We could have Mike Myers say it too, so that would make it hit even better. But listen to this answer.
That's the candidate we're offering.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Ashley Burke, CBC News. You've repealed the capital gains tax changes, and you're promising this middle-class tax cut, but you're also making new spending commitments. So how do you plan to pay for that, and what kind of cuts will you have to make to keep up with your promise of a deficit below 1% of GDP?
Well, a couple of things. One is that we are looking at driving efficiency in government, in other words, productivity in government, by flipping around the approach to government, which is to concentrate on the outcomes as opposed to the dollars in. And so that's part of the reason why, it's the core reason why we put in place a new Ministry Department of Government Transformation, use a series of reviews on programs, but also new technologies, AI, to drive those productivity. I'm going to, if I may...
So that's like exactly the playbook that's going on in the States right now. We're going to create this Department of Government Transformation, and we're going to use AI and different reviews to be able to find out what spending is efficient and what spending is not. We're going to be able to cut that so that we can save a whole bunch of money as a government. Now, the idea about what you then do with those savings is where things get a lot different, because while in the States they seem to be saying, well, we should just be spending less as a government in general. We should be changing policy so that the economy can take care of itself, so that businesses can grow, do these types of things. Well, Carney seems to have a different idea, and possibly a valid one. I think that reasonable people could share the idea that the government should then take whatever savings it can find through a review of government inefficiencies and plow that into new government investments. Listen to this. This is the direction that Carney thinks we should go.
Actually, just clarify something which you said, which is that we're differentiating between spending less as a government, and I would recall that government spending has gone up around 9% on average over the last several years. So we're going to get that level of spending increase down. That in and of itself will create room. But what we're concentrating on is Canada investing more. It is time to build. It's a tremendous time to build out this economy. It's what we need to do to create jobs, higher paying jobs and growth. And we will use scarce taxpayers' dollars to catalyze huge private investment in the likes of opportunities that we discussed as First Ministers on Friday. And for those who didn't watch it, I can understand why people wouldn't have watched that, so I'll say it now. This is clean and conventional energy. These are new trade corridors. This is millions and millions of homes in this country to get the cost of new homes down for all Canadians. And that's what we're looking to do as a government. That's what we will do as a government. And we put many of the foundations in place in just 9 days. We're asking for a mandate to finish that job.
So here is where the difference is in policies. We've got Carney's DOGE. Carney's DOGE, it is the same idea that's being heavily criticized by many people in the States, many people who maybe are more left-leaning in the States, and now we see the left-leaning candidate or the left candidate in Canada adopting this. So maybe it is good policy to look at government spending and cut fraud, abuse, and waste. I certainly think so. I think that there's probably a lot of bureaucratic spending that's going on that isn't resulting in actual dollar-for-dollar positive outcomes, where a dollar spent is more than a dollar earned back in the pockets of average Canadians when you account for everything. I think a dollar spent by the government is more than a dollar back into the pockets of the elite, the people who are running corporations, people who stand to benefit from vast government investment. That's where my skepticism comes in, though. It's this idea that Carney is saying that we, the government, we are the ones that are responsible for this economy. We are the ones that are responsible for investing and for building the economy from the government top down. We got to build this economy, and now's the time to invest. Now contrast that to the position of, well, hey, we believe that Canadians are smart. Individual Canadians are smart. They're able to build and they're competent. And if we take a step back and create a favorable environment for them to build, create a favorable environment for them to go make something of themselves and to take risks so that we can have a growing economy in Canada, we believe that they will. We just got to give them the environment to do so. That's a big difference in my mind. It's not saying, well, we need to invest in this industry, or we need to put such and such amount of dollars towards this developer because they're going to do this thing that then we hope will create jobs. I think that market systems can do a better job of growing the economy for average people than this top-down control of, well, these are the areas that need to grow, not these areas. Are you picking up what I'm putting down here? I think that makes sense. Because I think in a perfect world where everyone acts ethically, then these ideas of like, let's tax Canadians, let's find ways to save money so that we, the government, can then spend this tax money and this debt that we take on in wise ways that will actually result in positive outcomes for people. I don't think that that's a bad idea at its base level. I think in a perfect world, that sounds awesome. But I think that there is a lot of talk and warranted mistrust of the government, and a mistrust that they will spend those dollars effectively, that they will spend them without any conflict of interest. This is where I get skeptical. Because we look at a lot of the sustainable development funds that have happened in Canada over the past 10 years, and we see funds going to people in an outsized way that are in and around the Ottawa area. We see companies like Lion Electric getting massively funded and then shares sold and then applied for bankruptcy and not a whole lot of activity after that. We see these programs, or even outside of the green idea, we see these rent-a-feather programs, which are absolutely awful, taking advantage of these funds that are supposed to go to native Canadians, the Indigenous, to start their own businesses and to grow opportunities for this group of people. We see that being taken advantage of, where corporations will get access to that funding with questionable ties to any actual Indigenous person or business. I have a mistrust in the government to spend money efficiently and to spend money in ways that will impact people positively. I think this is a problem for a lot of people across the board. A lot of people who support policies like increasing taxes for the government to then be able to spend in certain ways. I think it's all well-meaning. I think it's all good ideas. Public health care. I don't think anyone should go bankrupt because they broke their leg. I think that's messed up where it happens in the States, and it's messed up in any country where it happens. Somebody shouldn't have to take out a second mortgage because their dad got cancer. Like that just is not a humane way to run a society. I think we should have a social safety net. People get disabilities. People have accidents and then are unable to work. And it shouldn't be the obligation of the family or that person to have a lowered, below poverty level life just because of this accident that was out of their control, right? These are ideas. I think that it's a good idea to have supports for businesses like I've been talking about, and starting new businesses and being able to incentivize that. But I don't believe that we have a government, or there are many governments around the world that are able to do that without being co-opted or without having people take advantage of them at the very least, lobbying for this money to go in a certain way that will then help private interests. Like even when we look back at the pandemic and the CEBA loans, you definitely knew about CERB and CRB, these multiple time $2,000 payments that went out to average Canadians around the country. That certainly did keep people afloat. A lot of the people who desperately needed that. But then we have the business side of it. And there were businesses that were saved and were propped up by this massive spending with the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and CEBA loans, Canada Emergency Business Account, or something, some sort of acronym. I don't know what that last A is. There were legitimate uses of that, but amidst the massive spending and the quick rollout of these programs, we also saw people take advantage of the system. I know of a guy whose dad bought like a brand new pool with funds that were supposed to be given for a business. And you get cynical about this kind of stuff, but if the government is going to offer these very low recourse, not really able to follow up and to confirm all these things, loans and programs and subsidies, then you almost can't blame people for taking advantage of these systems. You got people that feel like, hey, I've paid all this in taxes. I've created these jobs and employed these people. If the government's going to give me a loan that I don't have to pay back and they're not going to really check what I do with the loan, I'm going to take it. And honestly, I don't really blame people for doing that. I think it's probably more on the government to be able to back up and double check those things so that you create an environment where people don't do those types of things. It's more of an issue with the enforcer rather than the person taking advantage of it. Because if everyone around you is also taking advantage of it, then why shouldn't you? This is the mindset that you can reasonably understand why people are thinking it. It's like people who were out of work but didn't take the CERB and said, well, I'm not going to take this money because I don't think it's right that the government's spending. I think that if the government is spending and they are doing these things, well, then that is your tax money as well. And you should apply for all of these government programs as much as you possibly can, because that is the way that the program and the system works right now. You can have a conversation about should it work in that way, but while it does, don't be some martyr for the way that things go, right? But we got all of this stuff, and people just don't trust the government to spend their money in the way. And that's the big difference here, that, okay, this idea is Carney's creating DOGE 2.0, DOGE-T, DOGE-T, or Puck. We'll call it Puck. He's creating Puck. Mike Myers is tossing him a puck and saying, great job getting the government more efficient. This is what he's saying. But he's saying, we're not going to use that reduction in government spending to reduce your taxes significantly. We're going to use that added headroom that we get from becoming more efficient to then give money to private corporations so that they can build in the direction that we think that they need to build. I don't have faith in this top-down centralized growth strategy. But that's not it when it comes to the stories we got to talk about today. Because just this morning, I was going to record this, and I was like, oh, well, now I got to talk about this because it's the biggest thing that people are talking about now, is interference in Canada's election. I teased it at the top of the show. By the way, if you haven't already, follow the show wherever you're listening to it. Subscribe to the channel. It takes you just a click. Doesn't cost you a dime, doesn't sign you up for anything, but helps out the show dramatically if you like this type of content. But you know the story that Pierre Poilievre won't get his security clearance. They use that fact to say that he's not a responsible leader. But there are layers here that make the story almost completely impossible to follow and impossible to know the truth. The wrinkle in this story was that this morning, the Globe and Mail put something out saying that an undisclosed, unnamed, masked CSIS official came to them and said, "Hey, as long as you don't tell anyone who told you this, apart from where I work, you can tell people this, that CSIS believes that the Indian government played some sort of role in getting Pierre Poilievre elected in his primary election, right? In his, what's the word for it? In his leadership race to become the Conservative leader 2 years ago. Big controversy, front page of the Globe and Mail. Everyone's sort of talking about it. But it's impossible to know the truth when it comes down to this type of stuff, because there are universal accusations of interference across the board, regardless of which party you're in. Every Canadian leader, it seems, has been accused of foreign interference, which makes it incredibly difficult to determine what is true and what is not. CSIS has come out and said, well, there was a lot of interference that led to Justin Trudeau getting elected in the first place, let alone the subsequent elections and different terms that he got elected for following the original 2015 election. And now they're saying, okay, well, India had some role to play in getting Pierre Poilievre elected. And at the same time, this information is being then filtered through media organizations via national security agencies, both of which could have their own political biases or motivations for saying what they're saying when they're saying it. Now, if we get more serious about talking about national security and look into the NCCOP report that came out a number of months ago, probably 6 months ago now, well, one of the most shocking findings in my mind was that, and they said in the NCCOP report, that media organizations and executives have been compromised by foreign states. People have been paid covertly to write certain articles and have taken down articles upon request, and CEOs have been linked to foreign states and foreign networks supporting those states. This is what was in NCCOP, National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, this bipartisan, multipartisan, I guess, all parties committee that's supposed to study our national security. Okay, so our media is compromised, and their media is the one coming out with this national security information, so that makes things more complex. How do we, okay, well, let's move on. Well, then we look at those national security agencies, those institutions, CSIS. We look at the policing, the RCMP, in the media outlets like I just talked about. Well, all of these are made up of people who are susceptible to influence. These aren't, when you talk about CSIS, people think this magical thing that lives off in a sort of red velvet roped off area, and that's an institution that we have to trust in its entirety, because they are looking out for Canada's interests 100%. But in reality, these are all just same with our RCMP. These are all organizations that are made up of not gods, not infallible creatures that always are acting in the interests of the collective good. No, these are people. These are organizations like any other organization, and they're made up of people like you and me, people who can make mistakes, can become compromised, can be compromised via promise of power, promise of money, or on the stick end of it, not the carrot end, but the stick end, can be compromised as a result of blackmail or information that they don't want getting out there. These organizations can be co-opted. So that makes this whole thing harder to navigate. With all of these layers of potential interference and influence, it's nearly impossible for the public, or at least this is my feeling about it, it's impossible for us to discern from what is true and what is politically motivated. It's this fog of uncertainty that sort of just hangs over everything. Now, when we talk about this, China interfering in favor of the liberals, India interfering in favor of the conservatives, other nations interfering in whichever way that they may interfere, I think all of that is probably true, right? I think that any rational state, any country around the world, would be unwise not to be taking part in those kinds of actions, not to be trying to influence elections in other countries to try to get their own interests acted upon in those other nations. If you're a global superpower or have aspirations of becoming one, well, certainly you're going to be looking for this kind of soft power across the world. And there's this idea that's been floating around lately that nations in today's day and age don't see warfare in the same way. They don't see it as, let's put tanks and aircrafts and boots on the ground and have actual bullets fired or bombs dropped, this type of kinetic war. That's already a failure. The best way to develop power is by covertly influencing media, covertly influencing politics, by getting involved in building infrastructure worldwide, right? Growing the amount of nations that are indebted to you in some way or another, or growing your control over the supply chain or critical infrastructure, roads and electricity, satellites, this type of stuff is what I think really builds power in today's day and age. And I think that's what we're seeing here. I think it's probably all true. It's likely that Poilievre was helped by India in some way, shape, or form, even if he didn't know about it going on. Probably they wanted him in for some reason. But I'm sure that there was similar influence that was trying to grow in all other political parties so that the interests of other countries can be served. But I've been following it pretty closely over the past couple of years. To me, it seems like there's been more instances and more reports of China being better at this than other countries, better at getting their ideas and their interests acted upon in other countries, better at building infrastructure. I haven't heard as much about that from India, which is now the allegation that is coming out in the Globe and Mail about them being behind Poilievre. I haven't seen as much stuff, and maybe I'm misinformed, but I'm curious, what are the interests of India in Canada? What are these things that they're trying to get us to push? The one that I can think of is to try to remove support for the Khalistani movement in Canada, this organization that claims that they have a right to the northern Punjab region in India. The Indian government calls them terrorists. The Canadian government says, well, this is just a group, a religious minority group that is trying to stake their rightful claim to some land. Now, it's hard to know which side to believe on that. Is this group a terrorist group, or is it a political activist group that has legitimate claims to this land and the Indian government mistreated them? That's almost impossible to nail down and to figure out what's true there. But maybe that is why there would be Indian interference and Modi would want to do this stuff. The one thing that we had happen was the killing of the Khalistani leader in Canada, and then the Trudeau government a year later coming out and saying, well, actually, there were ties to the Indian government doing that. Now, the timing about that announcement always made my eyebrows stand a little bit. Is that hair stand, eyebrows stand? It made me stand. All of my body parts were standing when I saw that, because I was like, okay, well, this is happening right as all of this breaking news comes out about the Chinese interference in Canada. So it made me question the timing of it. And similarly, I question the timing of this report coming out in the Globe and Mail about Poilievre and his the interference that India has done on his behalf. I think it's probably true, but I question the timing of why it's coming out, when it's coming out, and who from CSIS is putting that out. And sure, it could be true that Poilievre could be limited in his speech if he gets clearance, but it also probably is beneficial to him to not get clearance because that gives him plausible deniability of any knowledge of this help. Now, this article comes out and Carney immediately says that Pierre's leadership race wasn't legitimate because of this foreign interference. His leadership isn't legitimate because of foreign interference. That seems a little bit confusing to me, given what happened in the Liberal leadership race. There's all kinds of speculation about what exactly happened in that leadership race, why people were kicked out of it. But even if you think that all of the decisions by the central Liberal leadership inside of that party to cut people from the ballot, even if you think that all of that was legit and had good reason behind it, which I think a lot of people question, well, then you look at articles like this. If you're listening in, the headline is "Freeland targeted by malicious WeChat campaign with alleged ties to China," says the Site Threat Task Force. This organization that's supposed to warn the public when there is interference in Canada's politics, in their federal elections, but also in their leadership races. So we've got this national security organization, which is made up of 5 of the top members of our national security apparatus. And they're supposed to come out and tell us when this is happening. But you've got this happening during the Liberal leadership campaign, which is at least some sort of evidence, if you can believe it, that there was interference from a foreign nation in the leadership campaign for Carney. Okay, but then this story comes out this morning about Poilievre, and then you have that same person who clearly, or if you believe this article about Freeland, benefited from interference. Well, then you have him pointing the finger and saying, well, no, not me, you. Not me, you. You were interfered with, and you benefited from foreign interference, albeit from a different country. Like I said, I think both are true. I think likely these countries are interfering to get their preferred candidate in, as any country should. As any country should if they're trying to exert power worldwide. It's not boots and bullets anymore. It's social media posts and it's covert operations in those countries that actually is the extension of real power. Or at least that's the way that I see it these days. But to act like CSIS and other national security agencies don't have any kind of political agenda is naive in my mind. These are organizations, and within them, to act like CSIS is just one entity, and when CSIS says something that it is a representation of all of the people in that agency, I think that's also naive, because much like any other group, much like inside of each of these political parties, the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, and the CSIS and RCMP, there are certainly power struggles. Different factions of people that have their ideas about the way that those organizations should be run. So to think that there is no agenda behind when things are said or who they're said by or when they're put out there, and that these organizations are above all criticism, I think is incredibly naive. But of course, it will all forever always remain speculation, because there's this curtain, this one-way mirror. This one-way mirror that you don't get to look through, and whenever you start to question the national security agencies, well then you kind of look like a fool. You're just looking at yourself in this one-way mirror. But on the other side of it is a group of people you don't really know who they are. You don't know what interests they're serving, what their conflicts of interest, what are their investments, what are their partnerships. You can't get these answers, and there will always be a very reasonable reason why you can't know. And that is for national security. It's for national security, because if we told you more information about how our national security agencies work, well, then we would be giving up all of that intel to our enemies and our people that may want to act against us. Very valid, and I'm sure there's lots of reason that is true. But at the same time, it also provides a convenient screen that could possibly allow these organizations to operate in ways that maybe the Canadian people wouldn't support if they saw behind that curtain. But of course, we will forever remain in speculation about that, because we simply can't know, because of this excuse that we got to protect our national security interests, and we can't tell the public because it would hurt us on a national level. It would hurt Canada. Would it actually? We don't know. We can't know how much. The problem is that there's not really any way that you can have an oversight agency for these organizations, because then those oversight organizations are just groups of people. So it's a problem that I don't personally have a solution to, but it's one that I'm thinking about, and I'm curious what you think about it. I think I want to end on a clip here, because this is the response from Poilievre to Carney's criticism of the India interference. And I'll point out once again that I think there has been interference in both of these, both of the elections, of these in the primaries. And there's going to be interference in this election to a great degree, even if we never hear about it. It's going to happen. I think that's just a realist way of looking at it. But here is Poilievre's response. He talks about, well, just like Carney did, saying, not me, you. Poilievre says, not me, you. For average people, I think it's incredibly hard to parse through what is true and what is not. But these are some allegations that I think Carney is going to have to, at the very least, answer for. Will the public care that much about them? I don't know. Or will it be lumped in with conspiracy theories and things like this, like we talked about earlier in the episode? I'm not sure.
Hi, Per. I'm Surya from Y Media.
Yes, sir.
So, Globe and Mail has done a story on election interference on Conservative leadership campaign. What are your comments on that?
Well, first of all, let's quote from that Globe and Mail article. I'm going to quote here. CSIS also did not have evidence that Mr. Poilievre or members of his inner circle were aware of these alleged actions. Then I'm going to quote the Hogue Commission, and I quote, "The Commission heard testimony about allegations of the government India interference in the Conservative Party leadership race. CSIS witnesses noted that they had no reason to believe the impacted candidates would have been aware of the alleged support." Let's be honest. I won the leadership fair and square. Even my political competitors, like Mr. Patrick Brown, have publicly testified under oath that that was the case. But I'm glad that the Liberals put this attack out today. Really glad. Because there's something that's really been worrying me. After Justin Trudeau named Mark Carney his economic advisor, giving him massive power over public policy in Canada, Mr. Carney went over for meetings in Beijing where he just had secret talks with the deputy governor of the Chinese central bank. 2 weeks later, Brookfield got a $250 million loan. What did they talk about? What did Mr. Carney in his role as Trudeau's economic advisor offer China? Why would he be having secret meetings with top government-controlled bankers about getting a $250 million loan while he was supposed to be acting in Canada's interest as the Prime Minister's economic advisor? Why would he be collaborating with a hostile foreign regime that we have since learned executed 4 Canadians and took numerous Canadians hostage for a lengthy period of time? And given that Mr. Carney knows that he still owns massive financial interests in Brookfield, which owes $250 million to a Chinese state-controlled bank, how do we know he's not going to act against our interests in favor of his financial interests? Why didn't he stand in front of this microphone and confess to Canadians that he owes the Chinese government that kind of money? Is this why he's covering up his financial interests? And given that China has murdered our people, taken our people hostage, how is he ever going to stand up to foreign interference when he is so financially compromised? We have never in our history had a weak, out-of-touch leader so terribly compromised and conflicted, who's in...
So I think you get the idea of where he's going here. Poilievre says, not me, you, and lays out some claims here, some very serious claims, ones that we've known about, ones where we know that Carney has massive equity and financial stakes in the companies that he's worked for, right? If you're any kind of good CEO or board member, you're going to negotiate so that you can get stock packages for being a part of that. You want to have equity in the companies that you work for. So I imagine it's true that Carney has financial interests in both Brookfield, Goldman Sachs, the other places that he's worked. But are these claims going to be lumped into the same kind of globalist conspiracy theory claims and ideas that are so often used to dismiss real concerns? Real concerns. I think that's likely what will happen, but we'll have to see how Carney responds to this. But he may just turn to the reporters that ask him the question and say, well, look inside of yourself, like he did to Rosemary Barton. Why are you assuming that I'm being nefarious because I have equity stakes in these big major companies? Why are you assuming that that means that I'm going to act against Canadian interests? Maybe that's shield enough. Maybe that's shield enough saying, well, as Canadians, you're supposed to look for the best in people. Don't look for the worst in me. Don't think of these negative things. I want a positive mandate. I want to be have a positive mandate from Canadians to build a Canada that, we Liberals don't think that Canada is broken. We think that we can stand on our own and we can build the country that we all want. So let's just be positive here. Let's not talk about where my financial interests may lay. Let's not talk about where the financial interests of my global community of people that I am associated with, where those interests lay. Let's not talk about the concerns about globalism and the impact that has on average people. Those are all conspiracy theorists. Those are all conspiracy theories, and they're not to be taken seriously. Look inside of yourself and find out, where's that negativity coming from? Look at me, I'm smiling. I'm at the hockey rink. I'm Canadian. Look at my resume. It's all good. Is it all good? I'll let you decide that. I think maybe I'm going a little too hard at Carney, but I'm trying to be clear here that I think there's interference on both sides. I'm trying to be clear here that I don't think that there's a lot of positive or even very transformative policies being put forward by either side. I'm a little bit frustrated by that. You've heard all of that on the show. I want to know what you think. No matter where you're listening, if you're listening on YouTube, go check me out and the show out on other platforms. All the links are in the descriptions. And comment there and rate the show. It helps me out dramatically if you appreciate this kind of content, if you appreciate me sort of thinking through how I think about things in public like this. Hopefully, my hope is that it helps you think about it too. Listen to other sources, not to just me. Listen to people you disagree with. And try to figure out why people think the way that they do and think, okay, well, maybe I should be considering that point of view as well. That's what I'm trying to do here. That's what I hope you'll do over the next 30 days, because it's certainly not going to get any less crazy. So subscribe to the channel, follow the show, and I hope to hear from you next time. Good night, everybody.